BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? Hope everyone had a good weekend. Just a couple of quick announcements and reminders before we truly begin. And the first is, I would like to give a big thank you to everyone who followed the episode on the curious case of Natalia Grace Barnett, which came out for the Anything Goes Friday segment. And I would also like to remind you guys that sometimes, periodically, there will be new YouTube shorts dropped here on BlackBoxOnlineRadio, which are also available on the Facebook page. My personal Facebook is in the description box, and of course on BlackBoxNid88 over on Instagram. Now today, I'm going to be sharing a big piece of Zodiac Killer news first, and it is mostly just an announcement. The Unabomber Ted Kaczynski has passed away, and it has been in several days prior to this recording that news was shared. And Ted Kaczynski was one of the few living Zodiac Killer suspects who carried on into the new millennium as well as into the 2000s and this current decade, which we're in right now. Ted Kaczynski passed away at the age of 81. He is the subject of the books The Unabomber and the Zodiac by Douglas Evander Roswell and Exposed by Mark Hewitt. Now, today I'm going to be talking to you guys mostly about a new Zodiac Killer suspect whom I've never discussed before on the channel, and his name is Loring Dale Hill. I first learned about him from a researcher who uses the online name Thornton Daniel Jeffrey, but I'm going to be referring to him as Jeff, as he commonly goes by, and his research partner is named Melissa Rose. And Thornton Daniel Jeffrey posted a photo in one of the Zodiac Killer groups which I follow on Facebook, and he simply said that this is the only true story of the Zodiac Killer. I will not answer any questions now. And I didn't know what to make of that. I mean, I didn't really put a lot of thought into that post that he had shared publicly. However, I saw that he had launched his own Facebook group called The Zodiac Killer and Me, as well as sharing lots of posts from his research partner, Melissa Rose, who is an old family friend. And I had a conversation with both of them via, let's say a phone call. I mean, we discussed this electronically about their Zodiac Killer suspect. And he is one, as I said, that I've never talked about before on the channel. I had seen the photo of him previously, but before I had joined the group The Zodiac Killer and Me on Facebook, I didn't even know his name, Loring Dale Hill. Now let's look at some possibilities about how Loring Dale Hill could have been the Zodiac Killer. Some background information. He would have been 34 at the time of the Zodiac murders. During the bulk of Zodiac activity, he would have been 34 years old. He lived in California. He was a career Navy serviceman, a career sailor, but I shouldn't even use the word sailor because he spent the majority of his time in the air, actually, starting out as a helicopter pilot in the Navy and then moving on to becoming a naval aviation mechanic. And the Zodiac Killer committed his first crime on December 20th of 1968 with the Lake Herman Road murders. But to discuss this suspect, Loring Dale Hill, I have to go to 1970, October 27th of 1970, with the mailing of the Zodiac Killer's Halloween card. And in this the reason is because that contains something that has been attributed to a Tim Holt comic book that says by rope, by knife, by gun, by fire. And I mean, people are pretty certain that that's the origin of it. It could be some type of coincidence, but highly unlikely. Or even if people think it comes from the Tim Holt comic book, maybe some people who are more skeptical would say that they think that it doesn't have an enormous amount of significance. It was just chosen at random. Well, Thornton, Daniel Jeffrey, Jeff, and Melissa have put together a very particular theory involving that, and it relates to the words by rope, by knife, by gun, by fire. Now, the Zodiac Killer famously committed crimes by gun: the Lake Herman Road murders, the Blue Rock Springs shooting, and the murder of Paul Stein, the taxi driver, in Presidio Heights, his final crime. Those crimes were committed by gun. The Zodiac Killer committed one murder by stabbing, and that was the murder of Cecilia Shepard, one murder by knife. And after the murder of Cecilia Shepard, or the stabbing of Cecilia Shepard and Brian Hartnell, I should say, Cecilia didn't die until 2 days later in the hospital. The Zodiac returned to Brian Hartnell's Carmen Gia and wrote a message on the car door, including the words, by knife. Okay, now, how does this relate to their Zodiac Killer suspect? What does by fire mean? Why did the Zodiac Killer choose to include that on his Halloween card? And their theory is that it relates to a fire that was on the USS Enterprise. And again, their suspect, Loring Dale Hill, is someone who was on that ship, naval career serviceman, working with the Navy Air Corps, for lack of a better term. And there's also a very particular detail that I'll just share with you guys right away, and this is purely Jeff's observation, and I'm giving him full credit, and that is that the skeleton on the Halloween card is Pose, the skeleton that people often like to interpret meanings to, or they think there's some type of deeper symbolic meaning with, is the one that's hanging from the spider web. And that skeleton was a posable novelty skeleton, which was positioned that way. There are all types of theories out there. One of them is it's meant to actually signify Jesus on the cross. Another one is that it's meant to represent Paul Stein's body in the taxi cab. Again, Paul Stein, the final victim of the Zodiac Killer. And then what Jeff and Melissa have shared with me is that it's actually meant to represent a flying monkey, because the skeleton on the Halloween card also has the number 14 on it. And in the 14th chapter of the original Wizard of Oz, written by L. Frank Baum, there's the introduction of the flying monkeys. And after 100 hours of flight time in the service, someone was I don't want to misstate my words, but they were christened as a flying monkey, and it's something that is symbolic. Now, what does this fire on the USS Enterprise have to do with the Zodiac Killer? By rope, by knife, by gun, by fire? Alright, the USS Enterprise had its fire, where the fire took place on January 14th of 1969. And I had never heard of this incident before. There are countless pieces of information about the fire on the USS Enterprise available on YouTube. And I do have to give credit to YouTube for that. I was being very critical of YouTube in some previous episodes for talking about their censorship, but YouTube is a great place to find documentaries and podcasts. And one thing about my American brothers and sisters is we are not perfect. However, Americans do love military history, and they love to share things about military history. And the fire took place on January 14th of 1969, and as it is famously known, the Zodiac Killer did not operate between the December 20th of 1968 and July 4th of 1969. So, where's all this going? Okay, now, there was this fire that took place, and I just had to read up on this a little bit, and I was like, wait a second. The fire on the USS Enterprise, where 29 servicemen passed away, 28 servicemen passed away, was off the coast of Hawaii. And I asked Melissa Rose a direct question: do you have documentation that your suspect was in the Bay Area in California on all the dates of Zodiac activity? And she said yes. And I'm like, well, how do you know that? 2 points. Number one is, the The USS Enterprise departed from California on January 7th of 1969, and it returned on July 4th of 1969, and their suspect, Loringdale Hill, was aboard there, and also his mother went on record in a local newspaper. She was from Ohio. Went on record in a local newspaper stating that her son was not injured in the fire which killed the other servicemen. So that means that there could very well be a solid explanation as to why the Zodiac Killer didn't commit a crime during the spring of 1969. It's a very odd time gap. December 20th of 1968 to July 4th of 1969. And I'm going to be very honest with you guys. I was approaching this story with an enormous amount of skepticism. And I really didn't think that I was going to find too much of value, but they have provided a solid explanation for why the Zodiac was operating in the way he did for the first two crimes, and they have documentation to show that their suspect was out of the country, meaning on international waters for a period of time, but then off the coast of Hawaii for the duration of for the duration of the hiatus in Zodiac activity from 1968 to 69, but it ties into a lot more about Loringdale Hill, and that is that they believe that the infrequencies in Zodiac activity heavily related to his military service, and in 1974 he got out of the Navy. He spent 20 years in the Navy. Again, he was a helicopter pilot and naval aviation mechanic, and they believe that that's why Zodiac Killer then mailed the Exorcist letter in 1974, which contains the line, "He plunged himself into the billowy wave, and an echo arose from the suicide's grave, Titwillow, Titwillow, Titwillow," not exactly putting an end to his own life, but perhaps putting an end to a chapter in his life, talking about his service in the Navy. Again, personal things that would be very relevant to their suspect. Loringdale Hill, I'm going to be very blunt with you guys, is Jeff's grandfather. And that also added a layer of skepticism into the story for me. But once I began to hear their observations and listen to what they had to say, they have built somewhat of a strong case around their suspect. I'm approaching this with a sense of optimism as opposed to pure skepticism. I mean, this guy posted a photo and just said he wouldn't answer questions, and it turns out his suspect is his grandfather. I've been very critical of people in the past about this, particularly when Philip Powers accused his own grandfather, Kenneth Lester German, of being the Zodiac Killer. I was on BlackBoxOnlineRadio saying, "What is this? Is this a new generation? It used to be my daddy was the Zodiac, now it's my granddaddy was the Zodiac." But Melissa Rose is someone who knows Jeff as an old family friend, let's say that, and a lot of the points that they are sharing come from research as opposed to just simply saying, "My daddy was the Zodiac." And it's not only the time frame involving the USS Enterprise. It's also involving, some things I'll share in just a second. But another valuable part of their theory involving the Zodiac is the Zodiac famously reported 37 murders, or even if you will Google the Zodiac Killer's body count, it will say that he murdered 5 people and he claimed 37 victims. But what they actually believe is that he was referring to 28 people who died on the USS Enterprise in that fire, again by fire, and then he was also talking about 9 victims. And I asked a direct question. At that point, I just had to ask, do you believe that your suspect intentionally played a role in the causing of the fire on the USS Enterprise? Or do you think that he was just simply attributing the deaths of these people to the Zodiac Killer's body count, almost just like maybe remembering his fallen servicemen in some way? And their answer was a very honest, "I don't know, we don't have that information." So again, I can see that they aren't just grabbing at straws or just making up stuff off the top of their heads. They are approaching this with a certain balanced attempt, if you will. And not only that, but I can get to some of the one point that people are definitely going to talk about, and that is their suspect, Loringdale Hill, does have facial similarities to the Zodiac Killer's composite sketch. Okay, I put it out there. Now we don't really have to discuss that point too much because I think that that is what everyone wants to zone in on. However, it's perhaps not the most valuable piece of information. Some other pieces of evidence that they have involving their suspect, Loringdale Hill, is that Zodiac Killer also wrote cryptograms called the ciphers, and a lot of people believe that the Zodiac Killer may have learned about codes and cryptograms in the Navy, and this has even been discussed on the History Channel's show, The Hunt for the Zodiac Killer. And one of the ciphers that the Zodiac Killer mailed in that has still been unsolved to this day is the Z13, and this contains the letters AEN, and there's a zodiac sign, and then the number 8 with a circle around it, and the letters K and M, and 2 more 8s, although it's not in the exact order. The exact order would be AEN, zodiac sign, circled 8K, circled 8M, circled 8, and then there is definitely a symbol that is not a letter of the English language, although some people have proposed that perhaps it could be a sloppy W, but I don't think it is. And then the letters N, A, and M. Okay, so what on earth does this mean? Well, it's a mystery. It's still unsolved to this day. So many people have claimed to have found their suspects' names in the Z13 cipher, such as Lawrence Kane, proposed by Harvey Hines, and even I talked about a possibility about how Arthur Lee Allen's name could be forced into the Z13 cipher. I mean, you have the letters A, E, and N in there. It's a pretty easy thing to do. But with their suspect, number 1, because he was in the Navy, Melissa Rose proposed that that symbol that is not from the English language, I mean, that little kind of rounded edge W, if you will, I mean, I know I said not from the English language and just gave the example of W, that one could very well be something that represents the naval anchor, because again, career servicemen in the Navy, I mean, that could represent the naval anchor. And the N, A, and M says Naval Aviation Mechanic. That's why those letters were chosen there. And you guys might already be thinking about something that I was thinking about. My immediate response was, well, okay, but what about these other letters here, A, E, and N, and the zodiac sign, and the K, and the M? Do you think that those have any hidden meaning in them? And their answer again was that they weren't sure of that, or they have not put together a theory involving the additional letters, and this is not their solution to the Z13, mind you, I'll share that in a second, but they simply have shown why those letters were chosen and put into one of the Zodiac Killer ciphers involving their suspect, Loringdale Hill. Now, as far as the actual solution, it would be his name, of course, Loringdale Hill, but it could be written as the name Mr. Loring D. Hill. And they did point out that you can get Loringdale Hill into the Z13 if you take off one of the L's in his name, Loringdale Hill with one L. Phonetically, it would still work. Or it could also be Mr. Loring D. Hill, and Loringdale Hill frequently went by the name L.D. Hill. And I guess I was really tempted to call him L.D. Hill because I think it's a little bit easier to say when discussing him. However, they have shared some stories about me that show that he was actually a very bad person, and I agreed not to share that stuff because, as I said, this is Jeff's grandfather, some family stories that show that he was a bad person. However, their strongest points are some things that I also am not able to share with you because of an agreement, and that is, it relates to pre-Zodiac activity in the 1950s, mind you, and even before the murder of Ray Davis in 1962, and that's all I'll be able to say, because with people who have unpublished research, or people who have a suspect and they haven't gone public with it yet, I usually give them the courtesy of, I will withhold any information that you don't want. These are your findings. You can share it the way you want. However, there are going to be exceptions. I mean, if somebody is writing a book and they've already made a series of YouTube videos, or they're posting on forums, or they're running their own Zodiac Killer Facebook group, and it's a public Facebook group, or even if they're just posting a lot of things in the comments section here on YouTube, yes, I'm going to talk about it, and I'm not going to hold back criticism because that person has shared their findings publicly, as opposed to Jeff and Melissa, who have mostly only shared this stuff privately. And I really do appreciate them talking to me about their suspect, Loringdale Hill. But, I mean, there are 2 ways, actually 3 ways, to get his name into the cipher, and I'll talk about one of them in a future episode. But already I've shared 2 of them with you, Mr. Loring D. Hill and Loringdale Hill with one L on the end. So I'm seeing some points I'm seeing some strong points. And as I said, the strongest ones are things that I can't talk to you guys about yet. But I would totally love to know what you guys think so far about this particular suspect. I mean, I think their strongest piece of evidence is, of course, the timeline. But now, let's look at some additional challenges, because we can't only just say the pros, we also have to say the cons. What do we make of this thing involving the fire on the USS Enterprise and the Zodiac Killer's Halloween card? I have to give a shout out to YouTube user Rick Hanson, a longtime follower of BlackBoxOnlineRadio, who talked about how the Zodiac Killer wrote by rope, by knife, by gun, by fire, but gunfire is a word in the English language. It's almost like the gun is the primary method, and then the secondary method would be fire, gunfire. And at Lake Berryessa, the killer committed the crime by knife, but then he also tied up the victims previously, prior to the murder, or the stabbing rather, they were tied up. So by knife and by rope were used together, by gun and by fire were used together, gunfire and knife and rope. And I follow everything that he was saying, and Rick Hanson made a lot of good observations about the Zodiac Killer mystery, and he went on to produce several of his own Zodiac Killer videos here on YouTube, and I've said in the past that I previously liked his explanation for the Z13 cipher, which was "My name is name my," which is just like a pure mirrored text, and it's not exactly giving away the killer's name. But I also did have a very strong question for Jeff and Melissa, and that was, what was their suspect's height and weight, especially if they knew his height and weight for 1968 and 69, because in the Zodiac Killer mystery, we have witness descriptions, we have footprints, and they have estimations on how heavy the person was based on those footprints. But the witness descriptions place the Zodiac Killer's height between 5 feet 8 and 6 feet tall, and the 5 foot 8 estimations come after the Blue Rock Springs shooting and after the Stein murder. Now, Donald Falk also saw the Zodiac Killer after the Stein murder, and he estimated that the Zodiac was 5 feet 10 inches tall. But then you have the estimation from Cecilia Shepard at Lake Berryessa, who spent more time around the Zodiac than any of the previous victims, and she estimated the killer to have been 6 feet tall, roughly. Exactly, I believe she said 2 inches taller than someone who was 5 feet 10 inches tall, therefore he would have been 5 foot 11 and then 6 feet tall. 5 foot 11 would be 1 inch taller, 6 feet tall would be 2 inches taller. Okay, though, so there are some discrepancies. At the same time, if somebody's proposing a 5'4" suspect, I think that that person is very close to elimination. If somebody is proposing a 6'7" suspect, I think that person is close to elimination, and I'm not thinking of any specific examples at this point. I just wanted to point out that, I mean, using height can be one way to eliminate people as opposed to confirming them. But that information has not yet been shared. And also, I really just want to hear more about their suspect, Loringdale Hill. And I know I said I would share the skeptical things with you guys, but this whole explanation of how he was out of the Bay Area on the USS Enterprise from January 7th to July 6th of July 2nd. Why did I say 6th? January 7th to July 2nd of 1969. He comes back into the Bay Area 2 days before the Blue Rock Springs shooting. I mean, I'm going to listen to more of what they have to say, and I'm going to try to investigate further. But if you have any particular observations about the suspect, Loringdale Hill, LD Hill, you can put your ideas in the comment section down below. Is there something that you're curious about? Is there something that you would like to know about? Do you think that the Zodiac Killer could have been in the Navy? And on that note, we were having our conversation and we were talking about the Zodiac boats which were used in the Navy, and in a previous Zodiac Monday episode, I said that they had been shared, or I shared something that the Zodiac boats were first used in the 1930s, well before Loringdale Hill would have entered the Navy, and even if this is just a long shot, I think that the Zodiac Killer would have had a lot of exposure to influences that would have prompted him to choose the name Zodiac, and the Zodiac boats could have been one of these one possible influence. And I'm just seeing more and more clues that suggest that the Zodiac was in the Navy. And I said all of this stuff on Zodiac Monday, prior to discussing this with Jeff and Melissa, and I had to ask them about a very particular thing. The Zodiac Killer wore the famous Lake Berryessa costume, the hooded costume that had the Zodiac symbol on it, and it had the clip-on sunglasses that went over the eyes, and it's a very, very intricate costume and well-designed costume, and there was a lot of thought that went into the costume. I mean, the Zodiac logo was sewn on to the dicky flap that went down over the chest. And I've said it once, and I'll say it again, the closest resemblance that I have seen from any design that exists currently is the Spanish capirote hood that is worn by hooded monks in Spain, but it's also worn by practitioners of the Holy Week festivities in Spain, and the photos that I've shared on BlackBoxOnlineRadio were actually from the city of Ceuta, but I decided to look for more images of the black capirote hood, and I saw that they were from Cadiz, Spain, and that I put Cadiz, Spain into Google. I didn't know anything about that city. And it turns out that Cadiz, Spain is the home of the biggest Spanish-American naval base. It's a joint operation naval base between the Spanish military and the United States military. And Melissa Rose shared something with me that her suspect, Loringdale Hill, went on a tour of the Mediterranean on a different ship, the USS Saratoga. Now, did he have any exposure to these Spanish hoods, and did he acquire one? And you could see very easily how someone could have sewn the Zodiac logo over the existing, religious symbol, as well as pulling the pointed hood down and inserting the clip-on sunglasses. If somebody knew how to sew, or they were good with needlepoint or needlework, and they knew anything at all about modifying costumes and garments and clothing, it would have been very easy for them to do. And I might be completely wrong about that, but I just simply have to point out that those black hoods from the Spanish religious ceremonies are the closest match that I have ever seen to the Lake Berryessa costume. But please share your ideas on the comment section down below. Now I want to switch gears a little bit, even though I probably could just keep going on and on about Loringdale Hill as a Zodiac Killer suspect, and I want to talk to you guys about a movie that I had watched recently, and it was called Chronicle of a Serial Killer, and let's look at how some of these elements could be found in the Zodiac Killer's own story. And Chronicle of a Serial Killer is a film that is about a group of detectives that are trying to catch a fictional serial killer named Henry Brolin, and I watched it on YouTube, but it is actually on Peacock, Pluto TV, and Tubi, all for free, and it features the now late rapper DMX in a very minor role. He plays one of the detectives that is trying to catch the serial killer, Henry Brolin, and if anything, the actor who played the killer was, he was convincing to a point where you just didn't like him. It was like, I just think that you're the absolute scum of the earth. You're looking at this guy and you think that he's a real serial killer. I mean, he gave a good performance in that respect. But I want to talk about the motivations and reasons why somebody would go on to become a serial killer like the Zodiac Killer. Because in Chronicle of a Serial Killer, they showed lots of scenes from the killer's childhood. Again, a fictional serial killer named Henry Brolin. And they show him being beaten severely by his father, but this killer went on to target females, and exclusively females, and sometimes sexually assaulting them. And he became what Michael Stone would call a psychopathic torture murderer, where he is torturing the victims to death. And also, with this fictional Henry Brolin, he did not spend a lot of time killing the victims, another similarity with the Zodiac, but a difference is that he spent an enormous amount of time torturing them, and after the victims were murdered, after these women were murdered, he would get in bed with them, or whatever location they were in, and almost cuddle them, or just hold their bodies against his own, and it showed that the act of killing really was not his focus. It was more about power, domination, obsession, possession and obsession, gaining control over this person, keeping them close to him. And it showed that he was beaten severely by his father, and I thought that was so odd that he would go on to target females, and only females, sometimes in a sexual way, because I recently appeared on the Citizen Detective podcast, and I was listening to something that was shared by one of the other panelists and hosts of that show, Dr. Lee Meller, who has several books out on the subject, and he's hosted a lot of other podcasts on true crime. And he was talking about how there could be certain serial killers who want to overpower their father and kill their mother. And this is pure Freudian psychology and something that has to be taken with a grain of salt, also with the expectation that Sigmund Freud was not perfect and his observations and ideas were not perfect, but the concept of how somebody may have had a bad relationship with his mother and a very domineering and controlling father, which would be almost identical to the fictional serial killer Henry Brolin, who was created for the movie Chronicle of a Serial Killer. However, as previously stated, we've been talking about the Zodiac Killer, and Dr. Lee Miller's comments were about the Phantom Killer, who, like the Zodiac, targeted men and women. Not only women, and then they also targeted couples parked in cars in secluded areas, and the male victim is accosted first. And I thought that was a very odd choice in the movie Chronicle of a Serial Killer, and as I was watching it, I was almost paying too much attention to the psychology of the serial killer and not that much to the actions and activities that were actually in the movie. But I was thinking the only way they could make that work, the only way that they could justify that type of thinking is some way, somehow, the killer thought that his mother was supposed to protect him and she didn't. And that is exactly what happened. That shows that there is this type of connection between children and their parents that is very strong. And when they believe that their parents are not protecting them, creates emotional trauma in the brain. That's exactly what happened in the movie Chronicle of a Serial Killer, and I don't think I'm giving away any spoilers. It's more about how they showed that his father was beating him severely, and at one point the mother is just standing there and the father pushes her away, again, not protecting him, and then in other scenes, in other flashbacks, the mother's even encouraging the beatings. So his father is hurting him and he feels betrayed by his mother. There's even a recording of the serial killer, again a fictional one, named Henry Brolin, who is saying that mothers need to sacrifice for their sons. So the fact of the matter is, most serial killers have mommy and daddy issues, and almost certainly it comes from a lack of bonding and child abuse. I did an episode back in 2019 called Serial Killer John Hughes, the Red Jumpsuit, and it was about the serial killer John Frost Hughes. Frost was a nickname that he developed at one point in life, and I was talking about this concept of childhood trauma, and it's actually one of the more popular old black box recordings here on BBOR, and some people who knew John Frost Hughes personally wrote into the comments section, and they were saying some things that challenged my statements, and they were like, no, this guy was not abused at all during his childhood. I knew him personally. He had a very happy childhood. He went on to commit crimes because he got addicted to drugs, particularly meth. And they heavily disputed that with me. But I just have to go back to James H. Fallon all the time. He's the author of the book The Psychopath Inside, who talked about how the single biggest reason why people go on to become serial killers is because of child abuse. And I know I bring up that book very frequently, but it's about how a neuroscientist named James H. Fallon was looking at some scans of his own brain and noticed that his brain was almost identical to scans of serial killers and their brains, and he was like, how on earth is this possible when he is not homicidal in any way and doesn't have murderous tendencies? And he ultimately believes that it was because he was not abused as a child. So, one more time, if anyone would like to watch this movie, it's called Chronicle of a Serial Killer. It is available on Peacock, Tubi, and Pluto TV, as well as YouTube. I actually downloaded it back in March, and I use YouTube Premium, and I had it downloaded on my phone for about 2 months, and I thought, finally one day I'm just going to sit down and I'm going to watch this. And it had a bunch of serial killer psychology in it, which is what I mostly talk about here on BlackBoxOnlineRadio. So I found some value in it, and maybe someone else can too. And right now I would like to get to your shoutouts from BuyMeACoffee.com, as well as the super thanks on YouTube. Anybody who makes a donation or contribution to help support the show will get a shout out here on Zodiac Monday. And normally I talk about that at the beginning of the episode, but I really wanted to get into discussing the new Zodiac suspect, Loring Dale Hill. And our first one comes to us from Batman66, who says, fight the power in regards to the YouTube censorship, I believe. Batman66, thank you for your regular and consistent support, as well as all of the ideas that you have brought up and contributed to episodes of Black Box Online Radio. And you guys in the comment section are really, really awesome about everything, because you share so many good points that get worked into future episodes. And our next one comes to us from Stefan Nyberg, also on the Super Thanks from YouTube, who says, "Great episode as always, Ned. Keep it up." Stefan, thank you so much as well for your continued support. I mean, I really do mean that. And our next one comes to us from B. Hardgrave, who sent this in to BuyMeACoffee.com. One more time, BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNet88. And he says, "I wake up in the morning, get my coffee ready, and absolutely watch BBOR. I love your show." Thank you so much, B. Hardgrave, and I really do appreciate the kind words. Our next one comes to us from Jordy K, who says, "Hey Ned, I love your content. Just here to share the love. I'm from Scotland, and I've been interested in the Zodiac Killer case for a while now. Peace, love, and happiness to you and your viewers. I like Gaikowski as a suspect, but I also find Donald Lee Booyak interesting too. But it's all from the mouth of Ed Edwards. I don't trust that guy. But yeah, stay awesome, dude." And thank you so much for sharing this stuff about Gaikowski, because you might like the book. So I See You Don't Paint Houses by Jeremy Burt Dion, because when I was talking to him in the interview that I did with him about 2 weeks ago, he also was thinking very similarly to you. He thinks that Richard Gaikowski was the Zodiac Killer, but he saw a lot of points in favor of Donald Lee Booyak being the Zodiac. And we have another comment that comes to us from Drew Harar, who says, "Keep on truckin', Ned." Yes, I gotta get out my trucker's hat. They're so valuable in West Virginia. I do wear that thing around from time to time, for good luck and all. So, thank you so much to everybody who has left donations here on BuyMeACoffee.com. And again, if you leave a donation or contribution, you'll get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And the final thing that I would like to share with you guys here for this week's episode of Black Box Online Radio relates to a new article that came out on ZodiacCyphers.com, and this was one that was sent to me by Richard Grinnell, and it says, "The identity of the deep real estate author revealed." And this came out only about several days ago, about 2 weeks ago, and the Zodiac Killer famously had a quotation attributed to him about deep real estate. So I'm just going to have a read one more time from ZodiacCyphers.com, and if anybody would like to reference this, I recommend they go straight to the article. Richard Grinnell does a great job with that website over there. "For many years, people in the Zodiac community puzzled over the identity of the author and meaning behind the deep real estate advertisements placed in the San Francisco Chronicle and San Francisco Examiner newspapers from 1 week beginning on August 26, 1976. The message in the advertisements read, 'Zodiac, your partner is in deep real estate. You're next. The Imperial Wizard can save you. To surrender to him or I'll terminate your case. R.A.' Zodiac Killer sleuths have considered whether this advertisement was placed by the Zodiac Killer himself, composed by somebody who knew the Zodiac Killer, or was manufactured with the Bay Area murderer in some type of correspondence. Some individuals have suggested that the Zodiac Killer may have had a partner, notably Fred Manali, who died in a car crash on August 24, 1975, just days before this advertisement was placed in newspapers. His name is synonymous with the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders. Oh yes, absolutely. Fred Manali is a suspect in the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings, and I once appeared on the Professor Dad channel, which has now, I guess, since been renamed The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, hosted by Thomas Henry Horan, and I was on a panel there, and one of the other participants was Drew Beeson, who was author of Sighting In on the Zodiac Killer, and he was talking about Fred Manali, and I asked him, do you think Fred Manali should be the prime suspect for the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings, which took place after the Zodiac Killer murders? And what Drew said was that Fred Manali should be the prime suspect for the murder of one of the victims, Kim Wendy Allen, because he appears to have a much stronger connection to her than the other victims, and I think that that's a very insightful statement, and as of now, that's what I'm going with. But I'll continue with the article. Recently, I produced an article from information mailed to me by Zodiac researcher Chronicle, who unearthed an advertisement placed in the San Francisco Examiner on January 14th of 1975, but from advertisements beginning on January 13th, 1975, with the message, Zodiac, it is time. Your capture is approaching soon, RA. I finished that article by writing, this may require a reassessment of the later message and the author's identity. The information provided to me by Chronicle advanced our knowledge with respect to the deep real estate author, but today some further information has been given to me that should really finally close any speculation regarding these 1975 and 76 advertisements. Thanks to Jibber Jabber, another tireless Zodiac researcher, the mystery of the deep real estate author is now probably over, and like much of the Zodiac case, it's not as fantastical as many would like to believe. The identity of the 1975 author, who likely created the 1976 advertisement as well, was found by Jibber Jabber in the San Francisco Examiner on January 14th of 1975. The advertisements beginning with the January 13th, 1975 one, were created and placed in the newspaper by a City College student attempting to flush out the Zodiac Killer by provocation. This should realistically end any interest in the deep real estate author and close another long-running chapter of the Zodiac Killer case. Only if some way, somehow, we could show that that person was not the Zodiac Killer, However, it seems like they found the name, and these advertisements, as you heard, are maybe not the strongest Zodiac Killer connection, but it's definitely another part of the Zodiac mystery. Well, that's all for me now, and I'm really curious what you think about Loringdale Hill as a Zodiac Killer suspect, as well as what you think about the reasons why someone would go on to become a killer, because I think that's what the movie Chronicle of a Serial Killer was trying to focus on. And if you have any comments about the Zodiac Killer Deep Real Estate article, I would love to read them. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there was always BlackBoxNed88 over on Instagram. And I will see you there for the bonus podcast. Goodbye.